And it's a good day. We're giving thanks and happy and staying warm between the blizzards up here in the hinterlands of small town salt of the earth, Iowa. Absolutely love it, except for the weeks when they decide that March is actually winter. Iowa, I cannot keep up with you. It's like whiplash. Every weather forecast, one day it's 60 and sunny, and the next there's blizzard warnings, and everyone stay indoors for the love of all that is holy. Oh man. Yeah, it keeps us on our toes and it activates our prayer life. We are not in control. That much we know, but we know the one who is. So thank you, Lord, for having it all under control. Thank you, law enforcement, for helping us when we are foolish enough to venture out.
Yeah,
Four-wheel drive does not mean four-wheel stop. This much I have learned.
yeah. It's been a really weird last 2 or 3 weeks of weather, that's for sure.
That is true. Jacob Hall, our featured guest today, the man who lives at the State House. I was just kind of thinking, hey, this is a nice time of my life that I don't actually have to be at the State House all the time. I'm able to take this for this season, as we say in Christian radio. Life is all about seasons, and in this season, I get to be home a lot more. But I am trying to stay informed long distance so that our legislators remember who they serve and remember the things that are really important to us. So for those of you that are, just living your daily life and loving your family and going to work, and you might not know all the action that's been taking place at the State House. Our family went on a little spring break vacation. And so we actually were out of town during probably the most volatile, the most crazy time at the Iowa State House. But I was keeping touch long distance and doing my civic duty. And the place that you have to go in order to be well informed is the Iowa Standard. Jacob, of course, like I said, I joke that you live at the State House, but I'm sure it feels like that many times
Feels like
because
that.
you stay on top of all of the legislation, all the votes, all of the committees and subcommittees. Man, I don't know if you ever sleep, but I'm so thankful that you are on that wall. So let me just start with major props and also how do you do it?
First of all, I appreciate that. Second of all, just try and keep people informed because the number one thing is knowing what's going on. I think that's the biggest barrier toward people getting what they want is they just don't always know what's going on, and then they don't really know the best way to go about trying to accomplish what they want. So I try and help people out in that regard.
Well, and you do a great job. I know it's difficult, to say the least, and it's not the least of which because we have people that may or may not be quite so honest about the efforts and the strategery going on behind the scenes. So we'll definitely get into that. I think I have to start, like I said, by giving you and the Iowa Standard props for getting the protection. I call it the Protection for Women Act. What it was is a removal of sexual orientation and gender identity as a specially protected class in the Iowa Code. And in so doing, Iowa actually set the standard now for just treating women and men as equal under the law without special protections based on who you like or how you feel that day. And this truly is it's an equalizing of that protection rather than affording certain citizens, a certain minute minority of citizens, special protections under the law, which of course has caused a whole host of problems over the last decade and a half since it was enacted in 2007. But now I see this as a leveling of the playing field and a removal of the danger to, especially to women and girls, but that gender confusion and gender identity has wrought. I see this as a major step in the right direction. It, of course, was heavily and highly contested and not without its detractors, even in the Republican Party. So I'd love for you to give a quick recap of that. I'm sure most of our listeners are probably familiar with what's been happening. We've been trying to keep them informed. But if you could give us the inside scoop on what you saw from the State House over that week, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the kind of backdoor attempts maybe to undermine those efforts.
Yeah, it started with the bill kind of dropping on Thursday night, Thursday afternoon, the week before. And then the subcommittee was scheduled in the House for Monday. They did subcommittee and committee same day on Monday in the House. And then they called for a public hearing on Thursday morning. And by Thursday, they were debating the bill on the floor of the chambers. The Senate had its subcommittee on Tuesday and then had it in full committee on Wednesday. and then they also passed it first on Thursday, early afternoon, I want to say, if I remember right. But the bill really just it repeals gender identity from the Civil Rights Code because it's really difficult to provide protections in the Civil Rights Code based both on sex and gender identity at the same time. So this basically gives full protections back to the class of sex, and then um, it defines words like man, woman, female, male, mother, father, boy, girl. Um,
Because we needed that in this day and age.
yeah,
We were super confused about that.
yeah, it took us a while to get here, but we're here. Uh, and really, I mean, it's just the big hurdle of it all was that, the counter side of this is, well, you're removing protections based on a class, and you're going to be the first state anywhere to do it ever. So that was kind of the talking point of the opposition that had to be overcome. And with that, there were some Republicans. Every Republican in the Senate voted for it. There were five in the House who voted against it, and then another Republican member who just didn't vote, but
Mm.
later wrote a newsletter on why he couldn't support the legislation. And then the day before, Wednesday night, there was an amendment filed late that would have essentially killed the bill because it would have left protections for gender identity in, I think, housing, employment, and credit. But it would have taken it out in public accommodations, and I can't remember the other one. Um, but that would have really complicated it because it would have left the definition of gender identity in the code, and it would have I don't know, it would have complicated the impending court battle when you're
Hmm.
saying that we're going to take this out in these instances, but we're going to leave it in for these others. That really would have been a complicated legal argument to make in court.
Yeah, and it would, like, my term is undercut. I saw that as a betrayal because it was coming not from the Democrats, because we all know where they stand on that these days. It was actually coming from Republicans, from kind of this hidden effort in and you covered this very well. So followers for our social media know that we were sharing all of your posts like the whole week. And it was very, very important and kind of shocking to see this sort of 11th hour attempt. And as it turns out, again, coming from a Republicans, which is in flagrant disregard of the Iowa GOP party platform, by the way, which speaks specifically on this issue and says that men are men, women are women, and these are the efforts that we support essentially clarifying the law to reflect that. So this was an attempt that was in line with our party platform, open and bold, no hidden surprises on any of this, which these folks would say presumably they would support if they are elected as Republicans. That's kind of the tacit agreement here. So they are countermanding that again, and it seemed sort of deceptive. Now, I don't want to go out over my skis here and say things that aren't in evidence, but it did seem like there was a misinformation campaign about exactly how this amendment might work. And I actually was messaging several of the people that had indicated support for this amendment, and I started asking them questions. Why is this the case? What if every male and female is protected under from sexual discrimination, then what third gender is there? What
Right.
third option is there that you're seeking to quote unquote protect? If we can redefine it in one area, then you're essentially redefining it for everything. You're undercutting the whole the whole point of this legislation, and you're basically giving in to the left's redefinition of all these terms, and you're failing to provide, and in fact leaving women and girls open to the destruction of their private spaces, of their legal rights. And I didn't get many good answers to that.
No, there were, I mean, to be fair, there were 10 names listed as sponsors on this amendment. A few of them I genuinely believe were duped, tricked, misled, maybe the fairest word to use, um, into supporting that amendment. They didn't, they immediately reread the amendment a few times, and then by late Wednesday night, they had agreed that they were not going to support the amendment. They were going to withdraw the amendment. They basically apologized. And then come Thursday, when that amendment came up for the bill on the floor, Representative Shannon Lundgren stood up, asked for unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment, and it was withdrawn, and it's like it never happened, I guess.
But it did though. And because we remember these things, I think this is important. When I can post the list of the names of the people that were around this, and I think that they deserve at the very least the call to question. I think they need to answer for their reasons behind this. For anyone, by the way, that like votes are obviously public information. I posted the votes on this specific bill on our Facebook page too. So anyone who voted for this, I think they deserve to be thanked because they stood up against nationwide opposition, nationwide name calling and threats. Thousands of people uh, is saying very unkind things
Right.
in the Capitol Rotunda. I mean, we haven't even talked about that from an experiential standpoint, what that was like. I'm sure I can imagine it, and I've seen some of the footage that you provided. But
Mhm.
what was that like to be able to stand in the eye of the storm?
It's not anything new, I guess, in terms of what's happened at the Capitol when bills like this or this topic has come up. There were obviously a lot of people there on Monday. I think it was the largest protest or demonstration they've ever had inside the Capitol. If you ask, the LGBTQ advocates, that's what they would say. I think I saw over 2,500 people was the reported number. I don't know how you would come up with that, but there were a lot of people there, and they felt strongly on their side of the issue. Um, I mean, it would be nice if tactics were a little bit different, but I guess everybody gets to pick how they exercise their First Amendment right, so that's how they exercised it.
That's true. That's true. And I've long been, I mean, this is the perfect place to thank all the state troopers, law enforcement, the security personnel that are there, because it is a very difficult thing to ensure that people who are so diametrically opposed all get the opportunity to exercise their First Amendment rights simultaneously, hopefully with respect, but at least not, at least preventing assault. And so that is a very, very difficult thing. And I just say again and again, thank you for that to all security and law enforcement. But Jacob, I know you're sort of an unflappable fellow. Like you've just seen it all at this point, and you know how it goes. I was bothered by the attempt to undercut that. I think that every single person has to defend their vote either way. They are
Mm.
representatives of the people. The problem is that most of us don't know about what's happening behind these closed door sessions. And so the wheeling and dealing that gets done, the bills that get referred and then scuttled. The ones that everyone kind of knows, that's never going to come up for a vote. All of the bargaining that happens is sort of the thing that makes me cynical about politics all around it in the first place. And I think it makes a lot of people kind of depressed in general. Now, I will say that this was a victory. This bill that we're talking about is a victory. I can't say the same about some of the attempts at major pro-life legislation. I really haven't seen much of an interest from Republican leadership now to press the advantage that we have. To me, like this is my heartbeat issue as to why I'm still involved after all those hits that just keep on coming back into the political sphere, because I care about protecting the innocent, protecting the vulnerable, protecting every person by law. And I think that Iowa has the wonderful opportunity to set the gold standard by offering protection for each preborn citizen. I do not see that. I don't see that same fire in Republican leadership. I mean, we barely got anything from them other than after the special session to recodify, to pass again the heartbeat law, the hue and cry over that, and that was a victory at the court level too. But ever since then, there's been almost nothing. And the same thing is true in this past session. I mean, have you seen, since you're there far more than I am, you're paying attention very closely to these things. Have you seen any effort to advance on the part of leadership? Because these bills are being submitted. There are at least two that I know of that were submitted to help protect preborn life. One was House File 453 that was considered an abolition type bill, which would essentially extend preborn the same right to life and recognize the same right to life for preborn as for born citizens of Iowa. And the other is House File 666. Ironic, isn't it? That would essentially, again, define abortion as the ending of an innocent human life. It was more of a life at conception, maybe more traditional language about that. But I'm not mad at it. I mean, I would have been fine with that. And nobody is pushing these. Leadership refuses to push these bills. Why is that?
Yeah, I think some of it is just the political realities of the day. I think there's still a feeling that the abortion issue cost Republicans nationally in 22 or whenever that was. Um, I would argue it's just the lack of a certain person's name being at the top of the ticket is the reason why the red wave in 2022 didn't come.
Mm.
But I think it's just they they want to, if there's a feeling among some of the legislators that they've gone so far on certain things that they want to try to pause for a moment and then maybe pick up the fight here in another, I don't know how long, couple years, I guess, because they don't want to take too big of a bite of an apple too fast, and risk the majority, for lack of a better term. But I do think part of it is, when you talk about some of these bills, and the idea of criminalizing the woman for having an abortion and doing all this other stuff. I think there's debate within the pro-life community on that one. Like, if some of these ideas and some of these bills are having to be debated by the pro-life movement and the pro-life community, then they're probably not gonna see prime time, I guess, is what they would call it, because you're gonna have to have pretty solid consensus from the pro-life movement in order to move something through the Iowa House right now.
I would agree that we need to get our house in order. Speaking as a pro-life Iowan that cares deeply about this and is willing to be vocal and fight for these things, we do need to get our house in order. We do need to all be singing from the same song sheet and pushing the same thing. I, again, think that we should be pushing every single time because we talk about the gold standard, which is to protect all life, period, no exceptions, preborn until the very last breath that we take on this earth, until natural death. So all along that whole lifespan, like surely we can come together around that. The effects of what that looks like is something that we have been told that our generation is not ready for. And I think as hard as the Democrats push, clearly they're not ashamed to push abortion extremes over and over and over again down everyone's throat. They actually lost on that issue. So I would turn around that whole debate and say, I mean, abortion extremism is a losing issue because we all understand the value somewhere innately within us. Pretty much all of us understand that it is morally wrong to take the life of an innocent baby. The question is, when do we define life? And when do, how are we having, that's our job to educate and illustrate, I suppose. I mean, that could well be argued, and we need to do a good job at that. But if we're not going to defend these principles from the beginning, then yeah, I mean, it's a serious problem. But what happens when those bills are up for debate? If we do get good legislation and then a supposedly pro-life speaker, as in, his name rhymes with Pat Grassley, refuses to take up pro-life bills and has apparently said he's just not pushing any of that this session. I think that it deserves to be top priority. And I haven't gotten a chance to talk to him face to face about that. So I can reserve judgment until I hear it from him and hear his reasoning. But I think he should be forced to explain that reasoning.
Yeah. I think as for the speaker, he's come a long way, from when I started going down there, I think in 2019. At the end of the day, he is speaker for the Republican caucus. I'm giving you the answer that, they would give you, not the one you'd necessarily like. Uh,
That's okay.
so I
Give
mean,
it to me straight, Jake.
they're just, if they don't have the votes, they don't have the votes, and if they don't have the
Mm-hmm.
political will, they don't have the political will. That's just the way they operate,
Mm-hmm.
uh, for better or worse. So, I mean, I just, I think it falls back on the pro-life community to really demand more of their elected officials. But I also know that they're only going to do so many controversial things in one legislative session,
Yep.
and the gender identity thing was a pretty big one for them in terms of the controversy and the firestorm that ensued. So, uh, the life issue, I mean, it's it's obviously a matter of life or death, and it is very important. And no, if you don't have the right to life, no other right after that really matters that much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's just something that the movement is going to have to come together on and decide how serious they want to be.
Yeah. And I think we should. I think 4,000 babies a day depend on this.
Hmm.
on average. I don't think this is something that should be shoved to the back burner and thought, okay, well, and I guess there's always the right reason and the real reason. The right
Right.
reason might be, well, we're not ready for that, or we need to get everybody together and get all our ducks in a row, or we need to keep our powder dry. We spend all our political capital on this controversial thing. We got to wait till next session. Got to wait till the lawyers are involved. What about the courts? And then the real reason might just be there's a lot of people that claim to be pro-life when they run for office, and then when the rubber meets the road, they're just not.
Yep.
And knowing, not impugning a particular person, but having seen this rodeo for the last couple of decades, I know unfortunately that second answer is true more often than not. Now, I will say I have seen a lot of fire in this new crop of legislators over the last couple of elections, and I'm very pleased with the direction that a lot of the courageous, some of the newcomers have a lot of fire, and they're taking all the right stands. So I 1,000% appreciate and encourage all of them. I will say that leadership sometimes needs to be pushed a little bit more to prioritize. And that's where you and I come in as the Iowa public. This is where we need to be talking to our legislators, being well informed about the opportunities at hand, and to say, this really matters. This really matters. And if there isn't a great, bill this session around to support, then there is next session, and we should be promoting them. If there isn't one, we should write one. And when we do write them, we need to be aware of them and to be promoting them as a priority to our legislators. That taxes are, to me, this is number one. So taxes are not more important. Biofuels and whatever that might be, not more important. Whatever attempts there are to buy north or like southern Minnesota counties for some reason to like confiscate those. Daylight savings time is not more important. They
Yeah.
spend their time on a lot of chicanery, and I just like, we got to protect the babies. That's top priority to me. And
Right.
the rest of those things can wait to the back burner for a while. But you're right, this is a work in progress. Kind of disappointing that we're not pushing advantage, but that's where we are.
Fair.
Jacob Hall for the Iowa Standard. Now, I know that this is something that I'm going to come to you for information about, because it's the effort to, is it MAHA, Make America Healthy Again? Is that how you pronounce it? It's MAGA, but MAHA in its
Right.
RFK form.
Yep.
There has been some or a big push in Iowa. I would say Iowa is actually pretty cutting edge on a lot of these issues. And there was an open effort, and I would say actually, I don't know if it should be controversial, but it is an effort to remove pharmaceutical exemptions from liability. Is that the best way to put it?
Yeah, there was an effort to, in order for a vaccine to be made available to be administered in Iowa, then the vaccine manufacturer would have to waive their liability immunity. That's obviously granted to them at the federal level. That passed through subcommittee, did not get a hearing in committee, so that died last week. And
Okay.
then there was a bill also that would have just outrighted banned mRNA vaccines, gene-based therapy, whatever it was called. Um, from Iowa. Both of those bills did not get committee votes. They made it through subcommittee, but they did not get committee votes. And on the issues like that, like that's going to take some time. That's going to take some convincing. That's not a, and I understand the urgency that people who are already there feel on it.
Hmm.
Like I really do. Um, just again, the answer, you don't have to like the answer, I guess. It's 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 going to take time when you're challenging the way that people have thought for decades.
Hmm.
Uh, and the vaccine industry, the movement, whatever you want to call it, has had a monopoly in more ways than one, but they've also had a monopoly on kind of like how it's talked about, how it's discussed, and all those things, because the major media outlets made a lot of money off of vaccine ad revenue. So they
Right.
weren't going to report stories that were negative toward vaccines. So it's going to take a lot of time. I just encourage people, if you believe strongly in it, then you don't give up, and you keep pushing and you keep pushing and you keep trying to change the minds of legislators, because ultimately you need 51 in the Iowa House, 26 in the Iowa Senate. You're not there yet.
Hmm.
Probably not close on some of these issues yet. Which I know is like, it's Republican control, super majorities and all that stuff. The reality is like you're gonna have to convince a lot of people who get donation checks from people that want the vaccines to be available. So,
Yeah, you're gonna have to love doing it. If you see it this way, you're gonna have to love doing the right thing more than they love the money that comes from the status quo. And I mean, that's where a few committed revolutionaries kind of come in. And they just have to be the crazy ones that never give up and that never that continue to stoke the fire, even if it's from the opposition is quote unquote your own side. I think a lot of education needs to take place. And it doesn't always have to be confrontational either. I think it's pretty maybe even tempting to see the other side as you're my enemy and now I hate you and we stand on the wrong side of everything and we're gonna and yeah, I mean maybe I would say, for example, that the people that went on record as voting with made up gender identity against actual women and girls, they deserve to be primaried. If they're on the Republican side, they should not be there. That would be my blanket statement. I think they just gave you a pretty indicative test on exactly, like, they had their test, and if they voted no on that particular bill, I think they lost. I
mhm.
don't think they should be representing Republicans in Iowa with that mentality. Now, that being said, I think there are reasons maybe on lesser issues that we can disagree. We can talk about it, and legislators are people too. If you present them with enough information, if they're open-minded and reasonable people, then theoretically you might change their mind, shift their heart. That does happen. I have seen it. And it's really important that we continue to pray for each and every one of the people that are under tremendous pressure. And I would say thank them when they get it right, because that doesn't often happen. Usually they get yelled at over and over again for trying to take any, like, the tiniest little stand, which was one of the things that I tried to bring up in my more charitable phase towards the folks that were maybe taken in by this attempt at amending
Mhm.
the gender identity stuff. I'm like, if this is an attempt to moderate, I mean, bless your heart, the left will not have it. They will
Right,
call you all the same names just because. If you take any, if you may draw any line at all, they will automatically see you as the enemy. They will call you all the same names. They will say all the same nasty things about you. They will fight against you and scream at you just as loud, just as hard, for drawing any line at all. And
right.
so you might as well just go for what you know is true, because you're not going to avoid, no one's going to like you better if you try to be like, actually both sides will dislike you if you try to be mushed, like mealy mouthed in the middle, kind of dance around the issue. It's far better to just take a stand in love and say, here I stand and this is why. And I care about you no matter what, but this is who I am and this is what I stand for. It seems like some of us have to learn that lesson the hard way.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point. Like, they are people, and it's important when we challenge them or whatever. I think it's important that we kind of stick to the policy. We don't need to expect them to be perfect people. Nobody is. But what they're putting forth is public policy for the way that our state should go. So that's a big task. And in order to get them on your side, it's going to take it's being rude to them isn't going to get you anywhere. It doesn't work that way. You can try it. Like, if you want to try that and that makes you feel better, you can do that. But I would also say too, like, there are some voting records of some of these representatives who co-sponsored that amendment, for example, that weren't primaried in 2024 and had some pretty bad votes prior to that.
Mhm.
So this falls back on us almost as much as it falls back on them, because they're still there, but we're still putting them there. And it's, again, it's not, necessarily that these are terrible people or it's a personal thing. It's just a difference of opinion in public policy.
Yeah. And maybe they haven't thought about, because if you're only looking at an issue from one side, I think that's actually why testimony can be very powerful. And some of the things that happen in these committees and these hearings is that you get to hear from well-informed people who are involved in this specific issue. Maybe it is their number one thing, and they'll tell you part of their story about why. They'll tell you how they thought out. And I was really proud of some of my friends from Moms for Liberty and other folks that spoke out strongly. Some of the preachers and pastors, church leaders that I know that were very vocal on this, and God, to God be the glory and God be the victory and all of that. But if they've never heard the story, then they might not know why you care about it.
Right.
And so I think what the left is really good at doing is providing victims and providing very emotion-laden examples as to why you should follow their cause and why theirs is the only right way of thinking about things. And I think folks on our side have to be more open about sharing some of our stories and about the why behind what all of these things matter, whether it's life, whether it's just defending God's good design for gender, comporting with reality, why it is good to tell the truth, why our laws should reflect a coherence with the truth, why we ought to be upholding parents' rights, for example, and patients' rights, and not selling those to pharmaceutical companies, whatever it might be. We need to be sharing the power in our story, the power in our testimony. And I think God will be glorified in that as his people speak up. Jake, I know it's been an awful long couple of weeks, so I don't want to keep you, but I did want to ask if there are some other efforts, just because you see so much of this at such a detailed level. Are there other bills that we should be aware of as Christians, as conservatives, that we should be paying more attention to that we might not know about?
I think the most popular bill during the session has been House File 191, and that deals with banning chemtrails and geoengineering.
Oh, tell us about that.
That was well, there's not a whole lot to say other than it bans chemtrails and geo.
Yes. You're
As
so you're
far
saying chemtrails bad and we shouldn't have them.
I'm just saying this is something a lot of people showed up to at the
Okay.
subcommittee to talk about. I know the interest on social media has been off the charts on this bill. It just passed through committee yesterday or Thursday. It's it is an issue that has a devoted following to it.
Okay.
I guess like if you don't believe if you don't believe they're doing any of this, then I guess the question is, okay, well, what's the harm in banning something they're not doing?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you do believe it's happening, then it's something that you feel really strong about and you think is not good for your health, for your children's health, um, for the state, for the planet, for the crops, for everything. Then people have really gotten involved in this and
Sure.
letting their voice be heard on it. It's definitely been the bill that has gotten the most word of mouth behind it that I've seen.
That is fascinating. And again, it's not my number one thing, but it's something I'm willing to look into. And to hear people that are super passionate, that would be an area where I'm like, okay, I would love to know more. Tell me why I should advocate on one side or the other of this.
Yep.
But I do think that there have been some efforts educationally to again further bolster parents' rights to that haven't gotten quite as much attention that I'm still interested in seeing. I don't know if we can take any action on those after Funnel Week because a lot of the stuff dies after this time around. But no matter what, you can look to the Iowa Standard for coverage on all the things happening at the State House, the bills you should be aware of, the efforts, again, things that are kind of because you're there so much and you hear all of the scuttlebutt and what's going on behind closed doors. And it may feel like a thankless task sometimes, Jacob. So let me just say thank you. Thank
You're
you for
welcome.
covering this. I think you just all go on the record and say that the Iowa Standard is the reason that amendment, that betrayal of an amendment tanked and that, that this bill passed without the attempts to scuttle it. So I think you deserve a lot of credit for that. And I highly recommend the Iowa Standard on all things Iowa legislature.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. Good honor to whom honor is due, my friend. Jacob Hall from the Iowa Standard. I will link to them below. If you're not following them, what you doing? It's a great follow. You got to follow them. So I'll put some easy links down below because I live to make your day easier. That's what if I can make one person's day easier. I'm a mom. We've got 6 kids, 2 dogs, and no quiet. So we need something to be easy. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this conversation, just go ahead and follow us. And you'll hear all of our podcasts bright and early every time we post them. You never know when they're coming, but they'll come straight at you. No holds barred what we do. And again, just to end this conversation, please pray for your leaders today. Pray for your legislators. They do work for us. So that's usually the balance. Like a lot of people think, oh, well, they're our leaders. They won't listen to me. I'm just a nobody. Actually, you are the boss. So you get to make these decisions about, thank God and thank our founders, we get to make those decisions about who represents us in the civic level. So if you want them to speak for you, you have to let your voice be heard. So kindly and with Christian love, but with a commitment to the truth and the confidence that comes from that, let them know how to vote your values. Let them know. And when they get it wrong, feel free to correct them. I think that is a loving thing to do. But when they get it right, thank them and have it be a conversation. Remember to pray for them, whether they are your friend, your neighbor, your enemy, whatever that might be. We're still called to love them, to pray for them, to teach them the truth, and to uphold that standard. So thanks for listening. And until next time, this is FaithWorks Live, where we believe in our threefold mission to love God, to serve people, and to live free. There's no better time than now to stand for life. And you can stand with Iowa's original pro-life organization, Pulse for Life. They're the longest standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they're dedicated to informing, educating, and inspiring a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life, from fertilization until natural death. They serve at the State House. They educate in classrooms, at events. They proudly serve on the coalition of pro-life leaders. They are on the front lines of the battle against this throwaway culture of death that we see all around us, and we are winning ground. Hearts and minds are changing, and the pro-life movement is continuing to grow. And you can be a part of the exciting things that are happening right here in our own backyard at pulseforlife.org, and get your finger on the pro-life pulse. Sign up for their newsletter, find ways that you can make a difference, and how you can change hearts and minds with their pro-life apologetics course, pulseforlife.org. When a woman faces an unplanned pregnancy, every possible emotion goes through her head. Where can she go for help and for hope? She can go to Intervisions. Here in our metro, we have 2 healthcare clinics where she will find hope and help. From free pregnancy testing and STD testing to free ultrasounds, Intervision serves women and men with STDs who find themselves in vulnerable situations. They're completely free of charge because of generous donations from folks like you. And their medical clinics help their patients get all the information that they deserve, that empowers them to make life-affirming decisions. That's what they do at Intervisions Healthcare Clinics right here in Des Moines. Learn more at intervisionshealthcare.org.